After Yellowstone's wild beauty, Henry and Margaret set their sights on the open road again. But the farther they drive into the desert, the more the world around them begins to change, and the silence of the land starts to whisper its own stories. The road to the desert. The morning sun shimmered through the dusty windows of the Ford F-150 as Henry turned the key. The old truck started with a soft growl, as if it too were waking up after a long dream. Behind them lay the green valleys of Wyoming. Ahead stretched the endless road, a ribbon of asphalt twisting south toward Nevada and the heart of the desert. Margaret folded the map neatly on her knees, smiling. "From the Tetons to the sands," she said. "We've seen the mountains. Now it's time for something different." Buddy barked once from the back seat, tail wagging, as if in full agreement. The day was bright and dry, the sky an impossible blue. They passed through small towns with faded billboards and shuttered diners, places that seemed to belong to another time. Henry loved those forgotten corners of America, the kind where the gas stations still had bells that rang when you pulled in, and the people waved when you drove by. By noon, the land had changed. Forests gave way to rolling plains, and then to scrub-covered hills where the earth glowed red beneath the sun. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of dust and sage. They stopped at a roadside cafe called the Crossroads Grill, a small building leaning against the highway like it had seen every traveler come and go. Inside, the air was cool and heavy with the smell of coffee. A jukebox hummed quietly in the corner, playing something from the 60s. The waitress, a woman with silver hair tied in a red bandana, smiled as she poured their coffee. "Where are you folks headed?" "South," Henry replied. "Toward the desert. Maybe Vegas later, maybe farther." She nodded slowly, eyes distant for a moment. "Careful out there. The desert keeps her secrets. Beautiful, but she don't talk much." Margaret smiled politely, but Henry felt something in those words, a quiet weight. He'd driven through plenty of places, but there was something about the way she said secrets that stayed with him. They ate in silence for a while, watching heat waves rise off the highway outside. When they left, the woman waved through the window, her red bandana catching the light. By afternoon, the sky had begun to change. Clouds gathered in the west, dark and heavy, and the air grew thick with the smell of rain. Margaret rolled down her window slightly, letting the cool wind brush her face. "Feels like a storm's coming," she said softly. "Desert storms never last long," Henry answered. "But when they come, they don't ask permission." The first drops fell somewhere near dusk, wide, heavy drops that burst against the windshield. Then came thunder, low and deep, like the ground itself was speaking. The wipers beat back the rain, but visibility dropped fast. "Let's pull over," Margaret urged. "We'll find somewhere safe." Henry nodded, squinting through the storm. Lightning lit the sky in white streaks, revealing the faint outline of a dirt road veering off the highway. A wooden sign stood beside it, half hidden by rain. "Henderson Farm, 2 miles." Henry slowed and turned. Gravel crunched beneath the tires as they followed the narrow path through fields glistening with water. At the end of the lane stood a farmhouse, lights glowing faintly through the rain. He exhaled with relief. "Looks like we're not spending the night in the truck after all." A man appeared on the porch, holding a lantern, his outline framed by the storm. He waved them closer, shouting over the wind, "Get inside before it gets worse." They ran up the steps, shaking off the rain, and were met by warmth, wood smoke, and the scent of fresh bread. The man, tall, gray-bearded, with clear, steady eyes, introduced himself as Earl Henderson. "Not many travelers take this road anymore," he said, setting a kettle on the stove. "But when storms come, they always seem to find me." As they dried by the fire, Earl asked about their travels. When Henry mentioned they were heading south, his expression shifted slightly, something between curiosity and memory. "You're headed toward the old desert line then," he said quietly. "The what?" Margaret asked. "The desert line," Earl repeated. "Used to be a railroad long before the new highways came. They say it's still out there somewhere, half buried in sand. Folks around here used to hear trains in the night, long after the last one ran." The wind howled against the windows, and for a moment none of them spoke. Then Earl smiled faintly. "But that's just an old story, of course." Henry chuckled softly, though he caught Margaret's glance. that spark of curiosity he knew too well. It was the same look she'd had when they found the hidden meadow, when they drove north to Banff, when they stood at Niagara's edge. Outside, the rain slowed to a whisper. Inside, the three of them sat by the fire, and somewhere between the thunder and the ticking of the old clock on the wall, a new adventure had already begun to take shape. The rain had stopped by dawn, but the air was cool and heavy with the scent of wet earth. Sunlight crept through the curtains of the small guest room, touching the old wooden furniture and the pair of boots left by the door. Margaret stirred first, blinking at the soft light. She smiled, the kind of smile that comes when you realize you're safe, warm, and far from routine. From the kitchen below came the faint clinking of cups and the low murmur of a radio. Henry was already up, as always. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and followed the smell of coffee downstairs. Earl Henderson stood by the stove, pouring water into a dented metal kettle. "Morning, ma'am," his voice steady, weathered like the hills outside. "Hope the storm didn't give you too rough a night." "Not at all," Margaret replied. "You saved us a long, cold evening." Henry looked up from the table, grinning. "Best coffee west of the Rockies," he said, raising his mug. Earl chuckled. "Maybe the only one left this far out." They ate a simple breakfast, eggs, toast, and honey from the farm's own hives. Outside, the clouds broke apart and shafts of sunlight rolled across the wet fields. The world smelled clean again, as if washed new. After a while, Henry leaned back, sipping his coffee. "That story last night," he said, "about the desert line. How far from here did those tracks run?" Earl's eyes lifted from his plate. "About 20 miles south, maybe less. Used to haul ore and timber, way back in the 40s. Then the mines dried up and the desert took the rest. Some folks say the rails are still buried under the sand." Margaret's eyes lit up. "Could we see it?" The old man smiled faintly, not surprised. "I figured you'd ask that." He wiped his hands on a towel and walked to a drawer, pulling out a folded piece of yellow paper. "Got an old map here. Found it when I cleared out my father's shed. Shows where the tracks used to run before they disappeared into the canyon." Henry unfolded it carefully. The paper smelled of age, marked with faded pencil lines and handwritten notes. A thin black line snaked from Henderson Farm toward a place labeled Red Hollow, and beyond that, nothing but blank space. "Red Hollow," Earl said quietly. "That's where it ends, or begins, depending how you look at it." By mid-morning, the truck was loaded again. Margaret packed sandwiches, and Henry thanked Earl for his kindness. The farmer stood by the gate as they left, waving once before turning back toward the barn. The road south was empty, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt winding through dry hills and patches of golden grass. Here and there, old fence posts leaned sideways, and jackrabbits darted across the dust. The radio faded between stations, lost in static. Margaret studied the map in her lap, tracing the black line with her finger. "We're close," she said. "Maybe another 10 miles." The land grew flatter. The soil turned pale, like bone dust. Then, around a bend, they saw it, a faint glint in the distance, where sunlight struck something metallic beneath the sand. Henry slowed the truck, pulling to a stop. They stepped out, the air warm and still. Before them stretched what looked like the ghost of a railroad, rusted steel rails half buried in earth, disappearing into the horizon. "Well," Henry said softly, "looks like your legend had a bit of truth in it." Margaret knelt, brushing the sand from one of the rails. "Imagine how many people once passed here," she whispered. "All gone now." Buddy sniffed around the weeds, tail wagging. The silence was thick, but not empty. It felt like the land itself was listening. They followed the tracks on foot for nearly a mile. The sun climbed higher, the air shimmered, and mirages danced in the distance. At one point, Henry found an old railway spike half buried in the sand. He turned it in his hand, heavy, worn smooth by time. "Looks like it's been waiting for someone to pick it up," he said. They reached a small ravine where the rails curved sharply and vanished into rock. The remains of a wooden bridge clung to the canyon's edge, beams splintered and blackened with age. "This must be Red Hollow," Margaret said. She shaded her eyes, staring into the shadowy gorge below. Somewhere down there, water glimmered faintly among the stones. And just beyond the sound of the wind, something else. Henry tilted his head. "You hear that?" It was faint, like a low rumble, deep and distant, almost like thunder, but the sky above was clear. Probably the wind, he said after a moment, though his tone wasn't convincing. They sat on a rock, opening their sandwiches in silence. The rails beside them glowed faintly in the heat. Margaret took a sip from her water bottle. "You know," she said, "Earl mentioned people hearing trains in the night." Henry smiled, though his eyes were still on the ravine. "Well, if we do, I hope it's not looking for passengers." They laughed quietly. As they turned back toward the truck, Henry looked over his shoulder one last time. The rails stretched behind them, straight, unwavering, like a line drawn through history. The sound came again, softer this time, a whisper of metal, or maybe imagination. He couldn't tell. Margaret noticed his expression. "What is it?" He shook his head. "Nothing, just the desert talking." But as they drove away, a faint glimmer flickered in the rearview mirror, the light catching something behind them, like a reflection off steel. The desert at night has its own voice, low, endless, alive. By the time Henry, Margaret, and Buddy reached a small roadside motel, the sky was already deep indigo, and the last glow of the sun had faded behind the cliffs. The Desert Star Inn stood alone by the highway, its neon sign flickering weakly in the wind. Inside, everything smelled faintly of dust and old coffee. The woman at the front desk, silver hair, turquoise earrings, gave them a room key with a gentle smile. "Not many folks heading north this late," she said. "Storms, maybe, or ghosts." Henry chuckled softly. "We'll take our chances with the storms." Their room was simple: 2 beds, a rattling air conditioner, and a small window overlooking the dark horizon. Margaret opened it slightly, letting in the cool desert air. Somewhere outside, a coyote howled, long and lonely. They ate leftovers from their sandwiches. Buddy curled up near the door, and the world seemed perfectly still. But Henry couldn't sleep. He lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint hum of the air conditioner mixing with something else, a low, rhythmic sound far away. A deep metallic pulse that came and went like the beating of a slow heart. He turned toward Margaret. "You hear that?" he whispered. She stirred. "Hear what?" "That sound, like metal, like—" He hesitated, realizing how strange it would sound to say it aloud. "Like a train." Margaret blinked, listening. For a few seconds, there was only silence. Then, faint, distant, clack, clack, her eyes widened. "Henry, that's coming from the canyon." He sat up slowly. The noise grew louder, then faded again, carried by the wind. It was unmistakable now, the slow rhythm of wheels on rails. "Could be the wind in the fence," he said, but even he didn't believe it. They both rose and moved to the window. The horizon was dark, but somewhere far beyond, toward Red Hollow, a faint shimmer pulsed in the night, almost like light reflecting off moving steel. Margaret's voice was barely a whisper. "That can't be real." Henry exhaled, long and slow. "Tomorrow we find out." Morning came pale and cold, the desert washed in pink light. They left the motel early, thermoses of coffee in hand, the truck humming along the empty road. The map from Earl lay folded on the dashboard, its edges trembling in the wind from the open window. When they reached Red Hollow again, the world seemed changed. The same ravine, the same rails, but the air was different, charged with something unseen. Buddy ran ahead, barking once before stopping near the old bridge. Henry followed, boots crunching on dry gravel. He paused, squinting. There on one of the wooden beams was a fresh mark, a streak of rust rubbed clean, as if something heavy had passed during the night. "See this?" he said, calling Margaret closer. "That's not old." She touched the smooth rail beside it, cold, almost polished. Henry looked around. Maybe kids came here, or... He stopped. Down in the canyon, through the haze of morning dust, something gleamed, faint but steady. He took a few steps forward, then froze. The light was moving, a single beam, sweeping slowly through the ravine like the headlight of a locomotive. It glowed pale yellow, cutting through the mist, then faded, leaving only the echo of metal grinding far below. Margaret grabbed his arm. "Henry, please tell me that's the sun." He swallowed hard. "Not unless the sun's running on rails." They stood motionless as the sound grew louder, ch-clack, ch-clack, echoing off the canyon walls, closer and closer. The light returned, brighter now, gliding along the curve where the bridge used to be. Then, just as suddenly as it came, it vanished. The canyon fell silent again. No wind, no birds, just stillness. Margaret's voice trembled slightly. "Maybe it's a reflection from the road?" "There's no road down there," Henry said quietly. Not for miles. Buddy whimpered softly, tail lowered, staring into the gorge. Henry knelt beside him, resting a hand on the dog's head. It's okay, boy. Whatever it was, it's gone. They stayed there a while longer until the tension slowly melted away. The desert heat returned, and soon the sound of cicadas filled the silence again. Margaret looked at the rusted spike Henry had kept from yesterday. It glinted faintly in the sun. Maybe we shouldn't try to explain it, she said softly. Some things just belong to another time. Henry smiled gently, pocketing the spike. Maybe you're right, but I'll tell you one thing. That train's still running somewhere. They walked back to the truck, the canyon behind them quiet once more. As the F-150 rumbled to life and rolled down the dirt road, a gust of wind swept across the sand, and far, far in the distance, a faint echo followed. Shh, clack, shh, clack. Buddy raised his head, ears perked, then settled back down with a sigh. Margaret glanced out the window, her reflection framed against the desert sky. Where to next? Henry smiled, eyes on the road ahead. West, he said. Always west. The highway stretched endlessly westward, a silver ribbon cutting through red stone and sand. By late afternoon, the horizon shimmered like glass. Henry's hands rested steady on the steering wheel, his old Ford humming softly beneath the desert sun. Margaret rolled down her window, letting in the dry wind that carried the scent of sagebrush and dust. Feels like we're driving through time, she said. Henry smiled. Maybe we are. Buddy stirred in the back seat, his golden fur glowing in the sunlight. They had been on the road for hours, the hum of tires blending with the vast silence of the desert. Somewhere far ahead, the ghost of yesterday still lingered, the mysterious light they'd seen at Red Hollow. According to the map, Margaret said, tracing her finger along a fold, there used to be an old railway station not far from here. Desert Willow, I think it's called. Maybe we can stop there before nightfall. Henry nodded. Let's see what's left of it. The turnoff was easy to miss, a narrow dirt path between two wind-twisted mesquite trees. They followed it for a mile until the shape of a crumbling station appeared against the setting sun. Desert Willow. The sign was barely legible, half buried in sand. The wooden building leaned slightly, paint long peeled away, but the platform was still there, and so were the tracks, rusted, broken in places, yet unmistakably real. Henry parked the truck beside what used to be the waiting area. The engine's quiet click was swallowed instantly by the desert air. Looks like no one's been here in decades, Margaret whispered. Henry stepped out, boots crunching on the dry earth. Feels like it's waiting for something. They walked slowly along the platform, boards creaking softly beneath their feet. The air smelled faintly of creosote and iron. A tumbleweed rolled past like an afterthought of time. Inside the station, sunlight poured through cracked windows, painting golden stripes on the dusty floor. Faded posters still clung to the walls. One showed a proud steam locomotive roaring through a canyon. Margaret brushed dust from its corner and read the words aloud. Red Hollow Limited, since 1911. She looked at Henry. That's it, isn't it? The same name you found on that old rail map. He nodded slowly, eyes narrowing. Red Hollow Limited, the train that shouldn't exist. They moved deeper inside. The air grew cooler, stiller. Behind the counter, an old ledger lay open, its pages yellowed but intact. Henry lifted it carefully, brushing away the dust. Look at this, he murmured. Last recorded departure, October 18th, 1947. Destination, Canyon Route. Margaret frowned. That's over 70 years ago. He turned another page. There were no entries after that date. Only a smudge of ink that looked like it had been made in a hurry. Then something else caught his eye. A short note scrawled across the margin. The last train left after midnight. No passengers, just light. Henry's throat tightened. He ran his finger along the words. No passengers, just light. A sudden gust swept through the open doorway, rattling the old clock on the wall. For a split second, it sounded like the faint chime of a bell, the kind that used to ring before a departure. Margaret turned, her voice barely above a whisper. Did you hear that? Henry nodded slowly. The wind had died again. The silence that followed was deep, thick, almost sacred. Then Buddy barked once, sharply, and ran toward the open door. Outside, the desert was painted in gold and violet, and down the line toward the west, something shimmered, a single beam of light, faint but moving, sliding along the old tracks toward the horizon. Henry stepped forward, the sand crunching softly under his boots. "It's here," he whispered. The light grew brighter, a pale, golden glow that seemed to hum in the air. But there was no sound of metal, no smoke, no wheels, just the shimmer, passing the old station, sweeping gently over them like a warm breeze before fading into the endless desert night. When it was gone, the silence returned. Margaret's eyes were wet, though she couldn't say why. "It wasn't haunting us," she said softly. "It was remembering." Henry smiled faintly. "Maybe it's still finishing its route." He reached for her hand. "Come on, sweetheart, let's head back." As they walked toward the truck, the horizon deepened into twilight. Stars began to appear, slow and patient, like lights from another age. Before climbing in, Henry turned back one last time. The sign above the station glowed faintly in the fading light, and for just a heartbeat, he thought he saw the silhouette of a train, elegant, proud, shimmering like a mirage, waiting for its final call. Then it was gone. Margaret leaned against him, her voice soft. "You think it'll come back?" Henry looked at the dark rails, now cold and quiet. "Maybe not for us," he said, "but somewhere out there, someone's still hearing its whistle." He smiled, started the engine, and they drove off, the headlights carving a silver line through the desert night. And as the wind swept across the sand behind them, the faintest sound echoed once more in the distance. Ch, clack, clack, the rhythm of a journey that never truly ended.